things are getting strange in X-Files Rewatch podcast. I'm Nick.
And I'm Kim.
And my god, we actually have news.
Quite a lot of news as well.
Not just convention guest stars, but we'll get to them first.
You want me to do the conventions first?
We do the conventions first.
We've been talking about the two X-Files anniversary events that are coming up in America over the next few months for quite a while now. But over the last week, I think both of them have both announced their ticket sales and also announced their full guest lists. Okay, just to recap, first of all, we have the 30th anniversary event that's running from July the 7th to July the 8th at the X-Files Preservation Collection. That's taking place at both the Preservation Collection itself and at Saratoga Springs City Centre in New York. Guests announced at the event, we have William B. Davis, that's Cigarette Smoking Man, Annabeth Gish, Monica Reyes, Karen Connovell, who played both Mrs. Peacock and the psychic who gets killed at the start of Clive Bruckman's Final Repose, Jolie Jenkins, who's Layla Harrison, or as Nick calls her, the girl from accounting, who appears in Alone and Scary Monsters, Christopher Jenkins, who's Dr. Sanjay in The Founder's Mutation, J.J. Lendl, who's an official artist who did a lot of the official posters and comic books, Chris Waddle, who's a crew member, he did props and special effects, Mark Kundra, again a crew member, he is a set dresser, Bruce Harwood, who played Byers, Chris Owens, who played Agent Spender, Scott Bellis, who's Max Fennick, appearing in Fallen Angel, Tempest Fugitive Max, and Brian Thompson, who's the alien bounty hunter. There are VIP experiences available with certain guests, though be aware that Annabeth Gish and William B. Davis have now sold out. Ticket prices will begin at $30 just for entry for the 2 days. Secondly, we have FileFest that we've been talking about for a while that has a massive, massive guest list now. FileFest is taking place from September the 8th to the 10th at the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The guests, we have also got William B. Davis, Annabeth Gish, Bruce Harwood, and Chris Owens, who are also going to the event at the Preservation Collection. But in addition to that, we have Melinda McGraw, who is Melissa Scully, Darren Morgan, who's a series writer. He's known for the likes of Jose Chunks from Outer Space, Clive Bruckman's Final Repose, and Humbug.
And has been on screen twice, because he's both the host and he's in Small Potatoes.
That's true. Joe Harris, who's a comic book writer, he in particular did the season 10 and 11 comics, I think, that were released before season 10 and 11 of the actual series. Laurie Holden, that's Marita Covarrubias. Sheila Larkin, who's Margaret Scully. Rebecca Tulin, that's Tina Mulder. Jerry Hardin, or Deep Throat. Stephen Williams, Mr. X. R.W. Goodwin, who is a writer-director. He wrote The Earl and Mayor Flask, amongst others. John Shaban, again a writer-director. He, I think, did Badlar and The Walk. Michael Horse, that's Sheriff Skaney from Shapes, also better known for being Hawk in Twin Peaks. The Enigma, who played Conundrum in Humbug. Kristen Cloak, who was the writer of RM9SBG93ZXJZ.
I don't know exactly what episode you mean, but it's still just an insane title.
I wrote it down. I'm sure I got it right this time. She was also an actor. She played Melissa Ephasium in The Field Where I Died. Glenn Morgan, writer-director and part of the Morgan One duo. He wrote the likes of DeHander DeValet's Fallen Angel and Little Green Men. Steve Railsback, who played Dwayne Barry in Dwayne Barry in Ascension. Brendan Bazer, who played Agent Pendrell. Chris Carter himself. Nicholas Lee, who played Alex Krycek. Frank Spotnitz, again a writer-director of many episodes, including Detour and Endgame. Pat Skipper, who played Bill Scully Jr., Larry Musser, or it should be really the great Larry Musser. He played a number of side characters, but most memorably Detective Manners in Jose Chunks from Outer Space. And Dean Hagland, who played Langley. Adult ticket prices for this event begin at $149. Again, they're available to purchase now. That's for the 3-day general admission and access to any non-VIP panels. There are also a number of cool panels that you can purchase individually, including a couple of late-night events. One of them is a performance by The Enigma. The other is some improv comedy by Dean Hagland. So they both sound kind of fairly cool. So yeah, that's what I've got for the conventions. I think those are the complete cast lists now. So sorry for reading them all out like that, but I thought it's good for everyone to know who's coming to each of those events.
Absolutely. Now everyone who's going there just has to hope that David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson pull a Jonathan Frakes and just show up anyway.
Sadly, I feel it's unlikely.
It is. It's a bit of a sad thing that you've got this huge anniversary thing and the two stars and a few of the other more prominent recurring cast are missing. Because Skinner's not in there, is he?
No, he's not. But you do get some of the big recurring cast members like Reyes and Kryzik.
Oh yeah, and Cantorman, obviously.
I said to you when I was looking at the list of experiences you could have with the different actors, Mr. X is the one I'd want to meet. How cool would it be to have your photo taken either with Mr. X at FileFest or with the alien bounty hunter at the Preservation Centre one?
You want all the conspirators together. I mean, we're also missing like First Elder or...
All well manicured.
Oh, well manicured, man. Actually, is he still alive?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Actually. But very cool. But we have a weird other bit of news, which is the death of X-Files Albuquerque, which has been very vague concept for a long time, and a possible reboot of the series by Ryan Coogler.
Yeah, people are getting very excited at the moment, but it should be noted that the reboot is currently just in talks with Fox. It's not been totally confirmed yet. But yeah, they said that it's going to be a diverse new take on the X-Files with Ryan Coogler at the helm. That's the man who directed both Black Panther movies and Creed, I think?
Creed 1 and 2, I think, not 3, because 3's by the guy who played Killmonger.
Oh, right.
Who's a huge anime fan, it turns out.
Oh, cool.
Because that's why his costume in Black Panther looks like Vegeta, I think, in Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, I never thought about it before, but it does.
It's
Yeah.
apparently very intentional.
That's Michael B. Jordan, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Michael B. Jordan, yeah.
But yeah, it is kind of exciting. I think personally, I wouldn't really want to see them redoing any of the old episodes, but it'd be nice to see a new take on that kind of universe.
It depends how they do it. I mean, given these days, even reboots generally turn out to be soft reboots, so this could be another team in the FBI opening X-Files many years afterwards.
Mm.
And that opens you up to obvious cameos by all the surviving cast.
Yeah, that's not what I mean. I mean like in,
I know, yeah.
in the whole, if we try and retell Tombs from another perspective or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best you've got for... I'd hope they weren't going to try and remake any of the old episodes because I don't think it's going to work again. But they could finally use the sequel hooks they've left in place.
Yeah, but the comic book series did some of those and they didn't work terribly well. The comic book had a sequel to Host and a sequel to Home, and neither of them were especially good, unfortunately.
I'm not saying it's a good idea, but I can see them doing it, saying, which of the X-Files episodes with open ends did you really want to see a follow-up to that didn't get one?
Mm.
Or can we do a follow-up to Irresistible that's better?
I do think we could also use this as time, if we're going to retell old episodes, to do them a bit more delicately.
Yes.
We already said about Fresh Bones feeling really, really awkward, as well as kind of anyone that involves Native Americans and things like that. Perhaps we could have a more sensitive take on something like that.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully they'll just get off into doing entirely new and strange things. I mean, the weird advantage they've got here is they now have that break. If it's a soft reboot, they've got that break between how Series 11 ended and whatever's happened to the conspiracy in the interim. I mean, actually, that's a good reason on my way of thinking for doing a full reboot and not a soft reboot. As in, you can trash the conspiracy completely because it got out of hand by the end.
Yeah. Oh, getting ahead of ourselves in our rewatch, but I do remember after maybe about midway through season 5, for me, it started to disintegrate a bit.
Yeah, and obviously we'll get to this a lot better, but it still kills me that we have seemingly one conspiracy up until like seasons 5 and 6. Then we get into a very weird phase for the next 2 seasons. Then we scrap it all in terms of a different conspiracy altogether for series 9, and then scrap that for series 10.
Oh, I can't wait till you read the comics.
Yeah, well, you told me enough to sort of go there. Well, in some ways it's good you've decided to keep on going with that very strange plot point. In others, what is anyone thinking?
Yeah.
But anyway, obviously it's early days on this, but should the reboot come to pass with Ryan Coogler at the helm, obviously we're going to try and catch it as it comes out, so we might do a separate podcast as a sort of weekly sum up because we'll be doing it one a week.
I imagine that's going to be at least a year or 2 years into the future.
Oh yeah,
though.
we've got a while.
And that's if anything does come off of this as well.
Indeed, because Albuquerque was always slated to happen at some point, and that just kind of faded into the background after a while.
I think it's been in development hell since about 2020.
Well, I think you actually made a good point the other day. Is it kind of been done now?
Yeah, for recommendations for everyone, and please follow my Twitter if you want to hear my ragings on what happened to Inside Job. But there is a Netflix animated series aimed at adult viewers called Inside Job, which focuses on secret societies influencing the American government. And it is magnificent. But Netflix axed it, of course, after one season.
Which is actually a rarity. You usually get 2.
Yeah, it was a really sad one because Netflix green-lighted a second season, they started work on it, and then Netflix pulled that. So it's more annoying than most. But the series was made by one of the kind of producers, I think, of Gravity Falls. So you've also got that kind of Gravity Falls-esque feel to it, but for adults, which is absolutely great.
Well, didn't you say Alex Hirsch is in there somewhere as well?
He voices Grassy Knoll, the guy who truly did shoot JFK.
Very exciting, potentially, if it comes to pass. If not, I don't think we'll miss more X-Files, really. I mean, a fresh start is probably the best way of looking at it, all things considered. But a soft reboot is the done thing these days, so who knows what we'll get.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to follow the news as it develops.
Yep. So, anytime we learn something new, we'll bring that up. The other part of the news is we have started a Patreon. Hooray! If you like what we do and have some spare money you don't mind throwing our direction. Basically, there's 3 tiers, and every tier gets you early access to the episodes. Do 1 to 2 days earlier than the normal Thursday, if you're into that kind of thing. If you pay us $5 a month, we'll read out your names as a special thank you in the credits. And at the $10 tier, we'd like to get some suggestions for other things we could review. Currently, we're thinking other films other films that involve one or more significant X-Files people. So this could be something as obscure as Beethoven, which has David Duchovny in it, or I'm trying to think of a good film that has Gillian Anderson in it, actually.
Princess Mononoke has Gillian Anderson as a voice actor.
Yeah, we'll watch the dub version of Princess Mononoke. The other things, though, we're going to try and do some other bits and pieces for Patreon exclusive things. Like we're going to do a run-through of both X-Files video games, which should be entertainingly entertaining.
Or alternatively, if you've liked me kind of peppering my commentary with reading the young adult books, I'm interested in reviewing the comic books for season 10 and 11, and also the adult novels that were produced at the time the episodes were made, so the likes of Whirlwind, Ruins, Goblins, those sort of ones, because they're not actually based on an episode, so I haven't been doing them so far.
All this can be yours for as little as $3 a month.
Hooray!
Hooray. Our Patreon is patreon.com/thingsargettingstrange. For now, though, we're thoroughly stuck in 1995. Year of Windows and Microsoft. Well, actually, no. Windows predates that, but Windows 95, this is that year. There was probably something else significant in 1995, but I can't think.
We've forgotten that meteor striking the Earth or something.
Yeah. Our first of our 2 episodes this week is Softlight, directed by James A. Conter, written by Vince Gilligan, his first for the series. Vince Gilligan will write for a number of episodes from here on out, and as linking back to last week with the guest star, will go on to write Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. First broadcast on the 5th of May 1995. Notable guest stars. The most obvious one is Tony Shaloub as Dr. Chester Ray Banton, who's been in a lot of stuff. He's in Addams Family Values just about as Jorge. He's in the bar when she's waiting for Fester to be blown up.
That's really the first thing you're going to say.
That's first. I was working chronologically.
Okay,
that's not his first film role, but that's the first one I found that I recognised.
Good.
He's in Gattaca as German. He's in Men in Black and Men in Black 2 as Jack Jeebs.
Yep.
He's in Galaxy Quest as Fred Kwan.
Another great film if people haven't seen it.
And sadly, along with the rest of the cast, was completely on board to do the TV version of Galaxy Quest before Alan Rickman sadly passed away. He's also in 13 Ghosts as Arthur Kritikos. He's in Spy Kids and Spy Kids 2 and Spy Kids 3. And he's in Cars and Cars 2 and Cars 3 as Luigi.
Ah.
He's in 1408 as Sam Farrell, who I do not remember in the slightest.
No, I don't remember him being in 1408.
I wonder if he was Cows, I think. Turns out, and this was one surprising one, he's in both of the more recent Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle live-action films as Master Splinter.
Okay.
So, not Mako, we've got Tony Shaloub instead this time. He's obviously in Frasier, very infamously as the guy who runs a newsstand that Frasier burns down. His major TV work was in Monk, where he was their star role, and I think a Monk film is actually being talked about now.
Is it really?
Yep, so he'll possibly be reprising that one. And he's got a recurring role in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, as the father of Mrs. Maisel.
Okay.
Kevin McNulty, who plays Dr. Christopher Davey, who was in Time Cop. Oh dear. And Snakes on a Plane.
Oh.
And he was also in Squeeze, because he's the guy who says, I had a reaction to that question as well. When they do the
polygraph test.
He'll show up again in Apocrypha.
Okay.
He'll show up in Millennium. And he'll show up in Lone Gunman. And from this, I conclude that basically he lives in Vancouver. And last but not least, we have Kate Twa as Kelly Ryan, who we saw previously in Genderbender as the female version of Brother Marty.
Yeah.
So, a synopsis of Softlight. In a hotel in Virginia, Chester Ray Banton frantically knocks on the door of one room, shouting the name Morris. Banton shouts attract the attention of the guest across the hall. When he looks through the peephole, Banton steps back and his shadow slips beneath the door. The guest suddenly evaporates, leaving a strange burn on the floor. Banton realizes what has happened and flees the scene. This death is the last in a long line which has been assigned to local detective Kelly Ryan. She asks for help from Dana Scully, who is a former instructor at the FBI Academy. Mulder believes the guest died from spontaneous human combustion. The pair follow another lead and go to the home of a previous victim and realize that both she and the guest arrived by train. Also, in both cases, a light bulb has been loosened so it no longer shines. Due to the train connection, Scully asks Ryan to send a patrol to check out the station. At the station, Banton is looking at the floor because the room is lit by soft light and his shadow cannot be seen. When he leaves, he is confronted by two policemen, and despite his warnings, the officers step into a shadow and vanish, leaving more burn marks in their wake. Mulder checks over videotape of the train station the next day and notices Banton and his concern with the floor. Blowing up one of the image, Mulder sees the logo of a company called Polarity Magnetics on Banton's jacket. Visiting the establishment, they meet Christopher Davey, who identifies Banton, who is a physicist conducting research into dark matter. Banton vanished 5 weeks earlier after the incident in the laboratory when he was locked in a target room with an active particle accelerator. His account is enough for Scully to stop considering spontaneous human combustion as a cause in the case, but Mulder is now doubtful of this theory. Mulder and Scully apprehend Banton at the station and interrogate him. He allows himself to be taken to a mental hospital, but insists he is put in a room with soft light. He explains the situation to the two agents and that the accident in the lab has caused his shadow to behave like a black hole. He claims all the deaths were accidental and that the government will want to exploit him. Ryan and her directorate superior stop the questioning and take over the case despite Mulder's objections. Mulder contacts X, who assures him the government has no interest in Banton, but X then arrives at the hospital with associates and tries to remove Banton by cutting the power. However, his associates are killed when the emergency lights turn on and Banton's shadow hits them. Banton flees from the hospital and X lets him go. Banton returns to Polarity Magnetics and is confronted by Ryan, who he reluctantly kills with his shadow when she tries to arrest him. Banton tries to get Davey to destroy him with the particle accelerator, but Davey reveals he has actually been helping the government in the entire time. Davey locks Banton in the particle accelerator, but is killed by X. Mulder and Scully arrive soon after, too late to stop the process from triggering, believing that Banton dies inside the accelerator. Mulder, however, realizes that X has betrayed him and tells X to never contact him again. The case is considered closed, but Mulder notes that Davey also disappeared at the same time. Elsewhere, in a research facility, X watches as experiments are performed on the despairing Banton, who can do nothing but cry. It's a bleak episode, this one.
Oh my, yes.
So possibly an interesting place to start is that a lot of people don't like this episode, which is also interesting given it's Vince Gilligan's first and given his storied career from here on out. Interesting this is how he begins.
Most of the time I can see people's opinion, even if I disagree with it, but I'm actually quite fond of Softlight, and I'm not sure why it has so much ire against it.
I know some people take objection to the particle physics associated with it, because I have read some essays where people get really hung up on some things, like the particle accelerator is too small. Basically, it's compared to the Large Hadron Collider or most particle accelerators, they're in a fraction of the space, which oddly is actually handled in the episode by they actually say that it's a miniature particle accelerator, but generally you can't have them that small.
Physically, not at all.
Physically, not at all. It's to do with the magnets and curving the atoms. It's a case of they need to be the curvature needs to be so slight.
I don't know much about particle accelerators, but I do know a bit about fusion reactors, which I think are kind of similar. And the smallest fusion reactor in the world is still, massively, massively building sized.
Yeah. And they're in this like office park somewhere in this one.
Mm.
The other objection I remember from reading reviews is the nature of the black hole gives people pause, and people sort of saying, "Oh, why doesn't it take out like the walls and the cars and everything else?" And one counterpoint I did remember reading was that it's a black hole made from Banton, so it's actually going to only feed on humans, which kind of actually you can more or less work that one as what's happening there.
Given it's a series of events that can never occur, I could buy that as an explanation.
Well, I would say I think that's the other response to it is basically this is the hill you're going to die on. The X-Files has done and will do some astonishingly silly things, and this is the one that's too far for you.
Yeah, I remember reading in, I think, Bion, Ripley's Believe It or Not, a while ago, an article about what would happen if you stuck your head in a particle accelerator because it happened once.
Yes.
And it's like they said in here, it's the 2 billion megawatt X-ray, or whatever they called it, is that this massive carcinogenic beam went straight through the guy's skull, but didn't kill him. I think he might have lost the vision in one eye or something, and it's a huge cancer risk for the future. But it didn't do anywhere near the damage that we imagine this would do because of Hollywood.
No.
I've got to admit, as I say, I don't know the science of particle acceleration at all, because most of what I've seen of it comes from your things like the X-Files or Steins Gate or something like that, which I'm sure is not the best representation of CERN in the world.
Yeah, in realistic terms, what you get out of it is a graph of results and nothing on dramatic levels of anything.
I do remember when they turned on the CERN Hadron Collider that everyone had this fear that it might cause a black hole. But again, I'm not sure how much that was just sensationalism and things.
It's mostly sensationalism and sci-fi things. I mean, particle accelerators have always had this kind of weird mystique in sci-fi, because there's the old game Another World, if you've played that.
No, I haven't.
That starts with a guy late night in a particle accelerator lab, which gets struck by lightning as the particle hits the target. It gets hit by lightning, electric pulse gets him, and he transports him to another dimension.
Seems legit.
Yeah. This then led into the sequel game Flashback, which is slightly more famous. But yeah, I think the people criticizing the science on this episode feels really, I don't know, hypocritical given some of the other science we've had so far. If you can get past Space Ghosts, which was a terrible episode and everyone says it's stupid, this should not be beyond the realms of possibility.
It feels like picking holes but gamma radiation wouldn't turn you into the Hulk level
of... Or, radioactive...
It's that disbelief you've got to just kind of buy into so the episode works.
Yeah, or that radioactive spider won't give that boy spider powers.
Mm.
But yes, despite Tony Shaloub being usually a comic kind of actor, this is an incredibly downbeat, dour and pessimistic episode, ultimately.
He's often played serious characters too, like his character in 13 Ghosts is a bereaved husband.
That's true. I suppose my default, I think, is always Men in Black.
See, I think of 13 Ghosts, but that's just me.
That's fair. But he's done a lot of comedy. I mean, he does do serious roles as well, because there's that one adage, if they can do comedy, they can do serious.
I did feel you felt some of his characterization of Monk in the character of Chester Banton. You had the same kind of manicness that Monk has.
Yeah, although oddly, this is the precursor, so Monk would be way after this.
But with the case of Chester Banton, it's sheer anxiety. He's just running on paranoia and panic through the entire episode.
Yeah, and that comes across, but he does dishevelled and sort of on the verge of losing his mind very well.
As I think you would be in this situation if you're conscious that you can't control your own shadow.
Yeah, and I mean, you did look up where this one came from, because I think we should do this for all episodes as a case of what was the genesis of the episode, given how bizarre the last few have been.
Yeah, that's why I've started doing it. It's after things like Kalushari, with the entire episode was built around someone being strangled by a garage door. I've been curious about the genesis. And this one was when Vince Gilligan was brought on board. Chris Carter originally hired him just to write a one-shot, kind of unconnected episode, and then offered him his full-time writing gig afterwards. But he asked Vince Gilligan if he had any ideas for the episode, and Gilligan replied, well, I've been observing my own shadow, and I've just had this kind of idea surrounding of what happened if it became uncontrollable and kind of sinister. So he built this entire episode off the basis of essentially having an untrustworthy sentient shadow, which you can kind of see in the finished product.
I mean, I would say sentient doesn't seem to come across, although they actually do a pretty good job of making just a shadow look threatening, because it's pure black. There's only a few shots where there's actually like any kind of graduations of shade in it. A lot of the time it's just a black void.
I'm skipping ahead, but they kind of build into the shadow a bit more in the books, and as we've noticed already, that the books feel like they're kind of based on earlier screenplays. The book for this one is called Dark Matter. It's written by Ethan Royce, who interestingly is the pen name for Neil Shusterman, who is quite a big writer nowadays. He wrote the Ark of Scythe trilogy, which if you haven't read it, absolutely flipping excellent. In the final chapter of Dark Matter, you have that bit where the government have hold of Banton and he's strapped into that machine that's performing the brain suck even more obviously, because that scene is absolutely brutal in the book. But it mentions that his shadow on the screen behind him is getting darker as they do it, which I guess is the inference of they're kind of feeding this thing with more power and it's becoming more dangerous.
Okay. It does a future episode possibly there, because he's afraid of what will happen if he dies.
Yeah, he's always afraid of what will happen if he dies, if that energy is going to be released. But in the end of the book, at least, I don't think it comes across the same in the episode, is that essentially he's brain dead by the end of the book and he's just a shell that's there, still alive, and they're doing this test on him. Because it mentions the fact that he's been blinded by the tests that they've done and he can feel his consciousness just slipping away. Which makes it kind of questionable about what further experiments they're going to do on this shadow with his kind of vegetative state shell of a body.
And if you didn't think X was a bad guy before now, you really should after this. Which also, it's X's shades of grey morality. I mean, more so than Deep Throat of. He even assures Mulder at the end that he didn't kill Banton. Maybe you should have, X. Maybe you should have, given what you've done to him after that.
I thought that was an interesting scene as well, because you can hear Stephen Williams' sincerity when he gives that "I didn't kill him" line.
Yeah.
Whereas X is normally a lot of smoke and mirrors and is very non-committal about anything he tells Mulder. That's the time you feel his honesty.
Yeah, I thought, say, contrast it to One Breath with the whole, you got him killed, you got her killed, that's not going to happen to me.
Yeah.
And it's that break from how he's been portrayed up to this point, which is interesting.
Mm. It humanises him more. Deep Throat was always quite human from the very beginning. X has had that kind of pane of glass between him and Mulder, and this is where you kind of feel it crack a little.
Yeah, well, Deep Throat was a surrogate father. Let's not really mince words. That was what he was doing to Mulder. Whereas X is the stepfather of the family you've adopted into who didn't want you.
I love Mr. X. I think he's a fantastic character, and Stephen Williams has this perfect intensity when he's playing him.
He is very good. And fortunately, we've got hold of him for a bit longer.
Yeah, luckily. Of all the informants, he's the one who's stuck with me, even since I first watched it as a teenager. I absolutely, absolutely love Mr. X.
To be fair, Mulder only has 3, and only 2 of them are noteworthy. The last one is, what was going on here, really? So, one of the interesting things we noted on the episode, watching it through again, was we have a teasing reference to Squeeze and Tombs, which is a really neat little, very, very quick, very blink and you'll miss it. You have to have seen the series to actually catch it. Of Mulder and Scully presented with what feels like a locked room mystery. So Scully goes and looks at the air ducts. That's great. It's a lovely little moment. However, you then pointed out there's a deliberate failing in backwards referencing straight after that.
There is. Almost immediately afterwards, Mulder hypothesizes that it might be a case of spontaneous combustion, then has to explain this concept to Scully, who, even though she's just directly referenced squeeze, doesn't make any mention to fire, the previous plot about spontaneous combustion.
Do you get the impression, and I think this is presumably true of the shapeshifters with Genderbender and how that doesn't come up, is there are certain elements of previous series we're not going to touch on again and we don't want to admit actually happen.
Such a shame. I like fire.
I know you like fire, but I'm wondering if it's deemed one of these we actually know what we were doing at the time.
Fire, I guess if you're bringing to mind fire, you're also bringing to mind Phoebe Green, who the fanbase as a whole hate.
Yeah, that could be an aspect of why we don't actually want to invoke it.
We've been very careful not to mention Phoebe again after fire.
But of course, mentioning Genderbender brings us to Kelly Ryan, Scully's protege, who does the book handle her differently? Because something seems to be missing from her again as well.
What do you feel's missing?
I think it's mostly the end, because I get she was a former student of Scully's. That's fine, and that's a better way of bringing her into the investigation than we normally get, which is just they've been assigned a case. Like, we're getting to it in our town where it's, you've been given this case, why on earth have you got this case? This is a missing persons case. It's got nothing to do with anything. But this one it's a favourite to a former student of hers. We are going to be into Skinner's authority of the X-Files being per episode based, given Dodd Calm, it still stands out as the, and you got away with this how? But anyway.
This one doesn't start off as an X-Files, though. It's a favour to Scully's former student.
Yeah. And, I mean, so just to sidetrack a bit, again, the squeeze reference is nice because it's still, Scully is very open to wilder theories now. She's not going to shut down the sensationalist ones that she would have done in season 1. So, person squeezing through air ducts, that's fine. She'll come around to spontaneous combustion halfway through the episode, which is remarkable for her.
Mm.
Anyway, so Kelly Ryan is a former student of Scully, and that's how they get involved in the investigation. And that's great. And we have the whole proving yourself in law enforcement when you're a woman and the kind of compromises you have to make and how you have to be tougher than you feel you should be, or tougher than a man should be in the same situation, which is what seems to be going on when she kind of stabs Scully in the back with the investigation.
It's a common thing for all women who've worked in kind of male-dominated roles, is that you have to work harder to be recognised because just pure sexism. I know you often find that men deal with women differently than to how they deal with other men, which often feeds into this mentality in women.
Exactly.
Is you've got to be hard, you've got to be fearless, you've got to be absolutely ruthless, because they will not give you an inch.
Yes. It's really awful. So I get that's all fine with how she's operating, so that makes complete sense. There was that bit of whiplash, though, when she's betrayed Scully and Mulder makes a joke and Scully immediately leaps to her defense. Like, Scully, just a bit more ambivalent, Scully. I understand exactly where you're coming from, because, yes, you understand what she's going through. She has to all stab you in the back.
But at the same time, Mulder doesn't get this.
No, he doesn't.
Mulder kind of doesn't understand why Scully's behaving this way, why Kelly is behaving this way. Because he, I guess, is working from his own experience as a man, he doesn't understand the boys' club at all.
No, well, no, it's especially late 80s, early 90s, which is when he'd have come on to his rank in the X-Files. It's very notable. So this could be a thing that Ryan Coogler series could get into, is had Mulder been a woman, he would not be in the position he is. No way, no how would he have the X-Files. He would have been told, no uncertain terms, get back to work.
I'd kind of hope it from the Ryan Coogler series, but even though we're calling that a diverse X-Files, I'm going to say from the same point of view that Ryan Coogler is male.
Yeah.
So that might not be the diversity we're looking at.
Quite so. I think, flashing way ahead of it, Monica Rayhurst would have not been able to get into Mulder's position had Mulder not led the way to it.
Or the likes of Diane Fowley first.
Yes. Both of them wouldn't be there because Mulder needs to have got there first for anyone else to get there. I'm going a very roundabout way to that point. And all this is fine. I mean, I even get the fact that she's being very harsh towards Chester at the end when she's trying to arrest him. Even though Mulder's tried to give her loads of warnings about, like, just be careful, this guy, he is actually dangerous.
At the same time, would you believe that his shadow is eating people?
Of course not. But then again, he never actually says that. But at no point does Mulder explain to anyone except Scully what the actual situation is.
That scene where Kelly finally bites off more than she can chew is killed by Banton. It's kind of interesting for Banton's development too, because she is the only character he actively kills.
Yes.
All the rest are accidental, or people have ignored his warnings and blundered into his shadow. He is in a situation where Kelly is going to shoot or arrest him, and he kills her.
Yes, because he does not want this to continue.
Mm.
So it's the trolley problem, basically.
Yeah. Do I kill one police officer to potentially save thousands?
It's such a shame his friend decided to betray him.
Yeah.
But anyway, so all that is fine. It's the funeral at the end just feels weird, doesn't it? And the fact that this protege of Scully's, that she has basically got killed, will basically never be mentioned ever again.
It's hard to blame it on Scully. It's not Scully's fault that Kelly blundered in there with no backup, no partner.
It is absolutely
anything else. However, Scully has been encouraging her to take on the men's club throughout the entire episode, and when Kelly eventually does it, she dies.
Yep.
I'm not sure. That's actually, you've hit on my biggest problem with the episode is, I'm not sure that's a moral I want to take away.
No.
It's, hey women, don't challenge the status quo. Be meek and submissive and you won't get killed by a maniac at the end of the episode.
Scully kind of says that at the end, after the funeral. And I don't know, something about it just doesn't gel properly for me.
It might be a different time, as this wouldn't have been a flaw you would have picked in the 90s, but
Probably
today
not.
we're thinking, hang on.
Yeah,
that's not the moral I want to take away from this.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way of looking at it. It's very much a product of 1995. And at the time, I probably wouldn't have blinked twice at it, but these days,
it's an annoying flaw, and it annoys me quite a lot, to be honest, that sequence. But at the same time, I think the episode on the whole, people are unduly cruel to it. Like I said already, it's fun, it's a good episode, it's fast-paced, I enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I don't have a lot of problems with the episode. I mean, you've got to treat the X-Files like you treat Star Trek most of the time. In case if the science doesn't make sense, it's there as a narrative crutch. It's basically there to get the episode moving. If it works, it's immaterial. It's like we may as well critique all the alien spaceships and all the alien species we've had to date, none of which make any sense.
I feel it's aimed at me. I criticised every bug that they've passed in this series so far.
I think there's a difference, though, between when you've got a real-world creature like that, that's very different to you've got a hypothetical alien species and hypothetical spaceships with impossible technology.
Particle physics,
yeah. And I suppose, I could say it's all hypocriticism, but as you said, though, it's while everyone else has let the bug thing off for when they've been reviewing previous episodes where the bugs have done stupid things, but particle physics, woo, that's sacrosanct.
It's, I guess, part of your kind of knowledge base as well, is I can't criticise the particle physics because I know nothing about it. I do know bugs.
That's true. And though I let Ghost in the Machine off of a lot of the computer nonsense because it's a terrible episode, and that's my problem with it, not the fact that the computer science aspect of it is just gibberish. But it just feels an odd one to do. I mean, I don't see a problem with the whole my shadow has become an all-consuming black hole that only feeds on human matter. Cool, let's go with that. That's more interesting than some of the other plots.
I quite like the imagery when you see the scene of Chester's accident as well. It's very Watchmen.
Yes.
Where they go into the actual particle accelerator, I presume. I don't know the technical terms. But his old shadow is just burnt onto the wall. It's like those shadows you saw at places like Hiroshima and other nuclear test sites with the just silhouettes burnt onto buildings and things like that.
So that's our recurring Watchmen symbolism now.
Yeah, but it was very akin. Watchmen must have come first as well, with Dr. Manhattan's accident that turned him into a superhero.
I would not put it beyond the possibility that Vince Gilligan has read Watchmen.
It was very influential, even at the time it was released.
Exactly, and that was probably about almost exactly 10 years earlier.
It was definitely 80s.
I think it was 85, actually, so that would be, put it 10 years earlier. The other thing, though, it just occurred to me, though, while we've been talking about it, is there's a Peter Pan aspect to it, which I don't know if it's intentional or not.
In the form of the sentient shadow.
Well, not so much. The sentient shadow thing doesn't seem to sort of really come across, but in terms of the whole, you've lost your shadow, because this is the thing Peter Pan does, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how he's getting introduced to Wendy, at least in the Disney films. Apologies, I've never actually read the Peter Pan books, but in the film, the first encounter is contextualized by Peter Pan has lost control of his shadow. It's over there. We've got to sew it back onto me.
Yeah.
I have no idea if that's an intentional nod or that's a kind of a weird happenstance. I'm not suggesting that Chester Ray Banton is a modern day Peter Pan, but
There are childlike qualities to him, but I think that's purely his vulnerability.
yeah. You get this sense of. I think actually his friend describes him as completely dedicated and obsessed with dark matter, and it is very plays a hyperfixated person very well.
Yeah. It's the mania feeds into his later paranoia when he's convinced that the government will take him away and perform their brain suck, which ultimately they do.
Though it's really odd, it's a turn of phrase we've never heard before, and I'm pretty sure we never hear again.
I think it's the shock of it sounds like paranoia talking, it sounds like conspiracy theory.
Absolutely.
And then you see it at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah.
Yeah, they're actually all pulling stuff out of him, or they're doing something to him.
Which the book, again, makes clear is eroding his consciousness. Hence, his brain sucking away piece by piece.
Very bleak.
It's horrible. It's unthinkably horrible. It's up there with the dementia plot in Excelsior Day for things that are terrifying if you imagine them happening to you.
Yeah. But Hills are down in this episode, though, if the particle physics, if that you really have to, and the fact that this is not how dark matter works in scientific terms, but it sounds cool. I mean, no one really criticised Half-Life 2 for calling its weird stuff dark energy, which is also a thing in particle physics. But we could talk about impossible VHS technology again, because we've got that security cam footage of Chester Banton at the train station, which you can blow up to a crystal clear image of maybe 2 pixels originally.
It's the Blade Runner zoom in again.
It is. Sentient shadow, though, as a concept, I feel it was an idea they actually had at an earlier stage in the script. I mean, there's a few points through the episode where lights start to flicker around Chester. And I know you've made the point of this is purely to highlight the risk involved in the scenes. But it's not impossible that we've got this as a lingering after effect from a sentient shadow as a concept in the script that was influencing light sources in a bid to get Vic.
Or you have it as some residual power that he has as well, is like electromagnetism, he's affecting these lights in some way.
Yeah, I think that the problem ultimately, and I like that idea, is that it's completely inconsistent. Though that would actually give rise to the sentience idea.
I
but...
still think, as I maintained to you when we were watching the episode, is it's purely to draw your attention to the light source so you're conscious of it.
I would say I'd like it to be inconsistent so every light source he goes near it starts to flicker, that kind of thing. But I mean, given that usually does precede a death of some kind, you can kind of go with it's hungry or something, and this is a sort of weird effect it's having on the world around him.
Yeah, that is a neat idea.
But that's all conjecture. That's not actually explored by the episode at all.
Personally, think it's scary enough as it is, though, even non-sentient, inanimate. Just the idea of if a light flickers on at the wrong time, it will kill whoever's in front of you.
Yes.
As it does with the 2 police officers that train their gun on him, as it does with the 2 men that are with Mr. X and almost Mr. X himself.
I did like the Mr. X and Chester standoff. The fact that he's inadvertently killed these 2 assistants just by the shadow falling. But then it's Stephen Williams' acting ability of you can see the gears turning when he locks eyes with Chester when he walks out the room. Because if I could shoot him, I don't know what's going to happen after I do that. And Chester knowing full well that if he needs to, he just needs to angle himself a little bit differently.
In the book, you have X's train of thought at that point a moment, and X reads him. Because X is genuinely terrified. This is it's probably the most dangerous weapon we've seen in the X-Files so far because there is no defense against it. No. If that shadow touches you, you die. But X reads it in the fact that he's aware that Chester hasn't killed anyone consciously yet. So he deliberately puts the gun down because he knows that if he gives Chester the option to escape rather than kill him, Chester will just run, and he judges it correctly.
Yeah, fortunately for X.
Which is true that this is prior to Kerry's death being the only time that Chester does kill someone when he could possibly run away.
Yeah.
I guess we haven't really mentioned Davy at all in this episode, and I kind of like Davy because Davy's been one of the most malicious villains we've seen in a while. Davy isn't a monster in the sense of Donny Faster or any of the rest of it, but how well Davy feigns concern for his friend and how quickly he throws his friend to the highest bidder, essentially, at the end. It's a really intense scene because certainly I did know he was the villain because I read the book beforehand last week, but you read it through a lot, you think that Davy's genuinely concerned for him, and it's not until Banton's sealed himself back inside the particle accelerator that the mask just slips off. It's, you can do this, Chris. I can, but I won't. Where you realise that he's just sold him out to the government entirely.
He's very helpful at first, and there's a point there actually I'll get back to in a minute. He's very helpful when Mulder and Scully come to see him, and that always fine. You know something's up because he sort of eavesdrops on their later conversation, but there's no indication of what's wrong.
It could at the same time be concern for Chester.
Yeah. But there's a weird timeline flaw in the episode, which is always is a little bit iffy, and they gloss over as best they can. And it's the accident happens to Chester 5 weeks ago. And a lot of the episode seems built around he vanished inside the particle accelerator, like they turned it on, and when he opened it again, there was no one inside, but the shadow burned into the wall, is how it feels. But by all accounts, the accident happened, and Chester went home. And then his buddy has just assumed he's gone missing or not going to show up in the interim. I don't know, it feels like the narrative weakness of the episode.
Thinking in the Watchmen sense as well is we don't really find out how he left the building. In the Watchmen, Dr. Manhattan is vaporized and he slowly materializes over days and weeks afterwards.
Exactly, and I get the impression that was in the back of like Vince Gilligan's mind while writing it, but that explanation never made it into the script. So you just have the whole, he got zapped by a particle accelerator and went home, and then everyone treats him like he's missing.
I think it's decidedly unclear how much of an accident it was as well, given that Davy was present at the time, so is it possible that Davy orchestrated the entire thing as well?
Yeah.
It does seem funny that you'd run into the dangerous machine while it's active to perform tests just as a cost-saving measure.
I mean, I will also have to sort of say there's no way to shut down the process when it's triggered. It's really, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to turn this off.
It's up there with that rocket technology I think we had in space as well, of how we can't abort anything in that either.
Like, no, there's emergency shutdowns. Even if it wrecks the equipment, you have to have the emergency shutdown. I feel the Watchmen kind of sequence for it would have helped a lot, but basically, the problem with Chester being zapped and then going home, and that Chris might have done it to him, is that he must have had some idea this would happen, which doesn't feel right. And then Chester going home with the shadow also feels weird. And the fact that the US government knows enough about Chester that when Mulder mentions him to X immediately tries to kidnap him. So someone at some point knows what happened.
Which would read into the fact that Davy has orchestrated this entire thing.
Yeah, or knows exactly what happened in the aftermath. But then surely Davy would say he's at home, but we never get a sense that his home has been compromised. Because all we know is he's seeking soft light in order to stop the shadow.
Which is why he's at the train station where it's got the diffuse lighting.
Yeah. Overall, I like the episode. It's just, I think you had an idea that didn't make it into the finished product.
I do think, even by your standards, you are tearing this episode to shreds. I just want it on the record that this has been one of my favourite one-shots so far. I think it's really, really good episode.
Oh, I like it, but I just wind up like digging into narrative issues like this. But I think, I should happily watch the episode. It's just to make it a truly great episode, because it's fun and enjoyable and creepy and sad and tragic and all the rest of it.
Note Tony Shaloub. He's been one of the most enthusiastic guest stars since Brad Dourif. Did you know he was completely unaware of what the X-Files was when he accepted the role?
I did. I mean, I think there's a note where he doesn't watch TV or something, so basically he had no idea about anything.
He read the script and accepted it because he thought it sounded a bit like The Twilight Zone. And it wasn't until he recounted to other people, I've got this role in the X-Files, and saw how excited they were, that he realised what a big deal it was.
To be fair, he's not wrong. The X-Files is the Twilight Zone, the Outer Limits, just with a more strict framing.
This one in particular is a very Twilight Zone-esque concept. As you say, on the whole, it's a surprisingly bleak episode at the end. There's no real optimism to be had, especially as we finish with that shot of just the tears running down Chester Banton's face.
Yeah, and I think even if we can't convince you that Soft Light is actually a good episode, you have to acknowledge that this has given you an insight into X you didn't have before. You knew X was willing to kill and X was willing to lie. You didn't know X was capable of doing that. Because he's completely cognizant of what he's done and doesn't have a shred of remorse.
It's quoting the Klingon High Council, but it's just, he's completely not honourable in any way.
No. And he's handed Chester Banton over to these other people and can see what they've done to him. And that's just another day in the office for X, apparently. That's a level of, I don't know, just uncaring we weren't aware he had before.
Yeah, you'd feel that at least Deep Throat might be a bit unsettled by this X-non.
Yeah, I get the impression Deep Throat would have shot Chester by now.
Yeah, the detachment that X has is quite scary and makes you wonder about the nature of Mulder's informant.
Yeah, and should Mulder really trust this man at all, or have anything to do with him?
Quite.
But we shall skip briskly across to an episode that probably was meant to be funnier than it turned out. It's blackly silly, if not as funny as it could have been.
Tongue-in-cheek, I think I'd say. It's tongue-in-cheek.
Tongue-in-cheek, but you have a note about this, but we'll get to that in a minute. Our Town. Directed by Rob Bowman, written by Frank Spotnitz, and broadcast on the 12th of May 1995. Notable guest stars. Caroline Carver as Doris Kearns, was in Star Trek Next Generation. Gary Grubbs as Sheriff Tom Aarons will recur in X-Files Fight the Future as Fire Captain Cools. He's in the film for about 20 seconds. Keep an eye out. He's the one at the start.
I don't recall him at all.
It's after, and apologies for the reference here, after Caleb from American Gothic is gotten by the black oil, he's the one who sends the ladder down.
Okay, yeah.
That's the sheriff.
Ah, have to look out for him.
Timothy Webber plays Jess Harold, who will just be as also someone who lives in Vancouver, because he was Detective Talbot in Tombs. He will play Dr. Paul Faraday in Quagmire.
Okay.
He'll turn up in Millennium, and he'll turn up in Lone Gunman. And last, as Gabrielle Miller as Paula Gray, who we'll see again in The X-Files as Brenda J. Summerfield in Syzygy. I didn't think she had enough of a character to get a name in Syzygy, but it's been a while since we watched Syzygy.
I remember who she is.
And also, of course, she was in an episode of Frasier.
Of course.
So would you like to give us a synopsis for Our Town?
Certainly. The episode this time takes place in Dudley, Arkansas. In our opening sting, we see a government health inspector named George Kearns as he's following his very young-looking lover, Paula Gray, into the woods. Paula just seems to be toying with him, getting him to chase her, and he's getting increasingly frustrated as he runs into the darkness. We also see he doesn't look terribly well. He has some kind of seizure or possibly just episode of extreme pain before he follows her. George soon loses track of Paula in the woods and finds himself surrounded by these approaching lights. He is then suddenly killed by an axe-wielding assailant who is wearing some kind of large tribal mask. Kearns is, of course, reported missing, and a witness claims to have seen foxfire in the fields near Dudley, which gets the interest of Mulder, who has heard many other cases of this kind in that area. He's heard stories about people being spirited away by foxfire spirits, and he also likens this to alien abductions, of course, because he is Mulder. Mulder and Scully go and investigate the site of this alleged foxfire and find a large burnt circle in the forest, as well as some other weird trash around it, which kind of infers the fact that it might have been an illegal trash fire, including things like plastic forks. They also note a strange pronged object in the field nearby, which Mulder identifies as a witch's peg, something to ward off evil. The two of them speak to the local sheriff, who also iterates the fact that he thinks that George Kearns just ran off with someone because that's the kind of person he was. They visit his wife Doris, who seems to also feel the same thing, that her relationship was not good with her husband. He's probably run away with someone as he'd had a number of affairs. And she was also seemingly uninterested about his work and claimed to be unaware that he was about to recommend that the local chicken plant, Chaco Chicken, to be closed down because of multiple health violations. The floor manager of the plant, Jess Harold, gives the agents a tour bit unpleasant. It is a meat processing plant. He is very, very unimpressed, let us say, by George. He says that George was the only health inspector who ever had anything bad to say, and George had also recently had a workers' comp claim turned down. He claimed that he was getting terrible headaches as a result of line blindness, which is a neurological condition caused by repetitive high-speed motion, in this case the chickens on the conveyor belts. During the scene, we also see Paula Gray at work. She doesn't look terribly well, she's very sweaty, and starting to have waking seizures and hallucinations, even seeing George's head coming down the conveyor belt in the space of a chicken at one point. She eventually attacks Harold and holds him at knife point. Mulder and Scully both try to reason with her, but she's unfortunately shot and killed by the local sheriff, Aarons. The plant's physician, Dr. Vance Randolph, also explains to the agents that Paula was suffering from consistent headaches, the same symptoms that George Kern previously had. Scully decides that the most sensible thing to do in this eventuality would be to autopsy Paula, just to see if she had any medical conditions that she could have contracted from Kearns. She goes to seek permission of her legal guardian, who is Walter Chaco, the owner of the plant. Mr. Chaco is an elderly gentleman. He originally built the plant from scratch after returning from the war. Chaco gives them permission to do so as he too wants to know what was wrong with her. The agents surprisingly found on Paula's personnel file that even though she looks like she's maybe in her late teens or early 20s, she's actually 47 years old. The dissection of Paula's brain also shows that she suffered from Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, rare and fatal illness that causes increasing dementia, essentially turns the brain to sponge, causing a lot of debilitating side effects. As the agents are leaving the autopsy, they nearly collide with a Chaco truck that drives into the river. They later learn that the driver was also suffering from the same very, very rare disease. Mulder notices that the river is blood red due to runoff from the plant, and he orders a dredge of the river to see what they can find within it. Aarons is reluctant to allow this, but eventually agrees when Mulder says he will otherwise bring in his own people to do it. They very quickly find multiple skeletons inside the water. The unusual thing about them is every single one is missing their heads, and there are at least 9 of them, with more to follow, more being dredged up. Mulder also notices the weird thing that the bones they found have been oddly kind of buffed or polished at either end. He has the horrible idea that this might be a sign of cannibalism. He's seen similar buffings in reports of the Anasazi tribe, a tribe that was suspected of being cannibals, and it's a sign that the bones have been boiled in a big pot. In the meantime, we see Randolph and Harold discussing the uncovered bones and the increase of Creutzfeldt-Jakob cases. There have now been at least 4 of these, and it's pretty evident that they've all come from the fact that multiple people in the village have eaten George Kearns. Using FBI records, Scully and Mulder investigate further into this and discover that 87 people have vanished within a 200-mile radius of Dudley over the past half-century. Mulder, of course, has fully embraced cannibalism as the cause by this point. He also believes that this is prolonging the life of all the people who take part in it. This is why Paula looks so young despite the fact that she's nearing 50. The agents tried to search the town's birth records for further confirmation of Paula's age and the age of other people in the village, but they discover that they've been set on fire shortly before they attend the records office. Harold confronts Chaco at his mansion, really, really concerned that more and more people seem to be dying by the day, and Chaco doesn't seem to be doing anything to address this. Chaco's concerned more about the FBI agents. He feels that they need to do something about them, as they're the outsiders. They need to batter down and defend their own. At the same time, Doris arrives on the scene. She is starting to break down, concerned that she helped Chaco to kill her husband. While Chaco calms her down and assures her that she's safe, they'll take care of her, Harold is obviously getting increasingly worried about this. He feels that Doris is a weakness and they need to get rid of her. When Doris arrives home, she calls Mulder, convinced by this point that Chaco is going to be killing her. Mulder sends Scully to help her out, but in the meantime, Doris is attacked and killed by the figure wearing the tribal mask in her own home. While Scully is heading to find Doris, Mulder searches Chaco's mansion. Chaco doesn't seem to be present at the time, but Mulder finds a cabinet with a photo of Charco during World War II, it would seem, with a tribe that he stayed with in New Guinea. He also finds a second lock cabinet that, when he breaks it open, contains the shrunken heads of Kearns and other victims, varying wildly in the ages of the heads. Mulder calls Scully to tell her what he's found, but while Scully's on the phone, he hears her being knocked out by who we see as Charco at Doris's house. Charco takes Scully hostage and takes her to the secluded field outside the town, where he sees that Harold and the other townsfolk have started a bonfire and are currently consuming Doris. Charco berates them for killing one of their own, but Harold chastises him for allowing the CJD epidemic to occur. At this point, the people completely turn on Charco and he's executed again by the figure in the mask. They strap down Scully and she herself is also about to be killed when Mulder arrives and shoots the masked Axeman. He's revealed to be Sheriff Aarons. Harold picks up Charco's gun and attempts to shoot Mulder, but the townsfolk are whipped into a frenzy and trample him to death as they flee. At the end of the episode, we get a narration from Scully explaining that Charco's plant has been closed down by the Department of Agriculture and that 27 Dudley residents have died from Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. She reveals that Charco turned out to actually be 93 at the time of deaths, and she confirms that he spent time after being shot down during the war in New Guinea with allegedly cannibalistic tribe called the Jale. She also states that Charco's remains have never been found. However, the final scene shows somebody feeding the chickens at the plant, inferring that that might be where the remains have gone.
Thank you. I think you turned up a illustrative quote about this episode when you were looking up the production, that the director was a bad choice because they didn't seem to realize he was directing a comedy episode.
Yeah, it was one of the critics at the time. It's not a comedy episode. This is an early, I think it's the first standalone episode that Frank Spotnitz has written by himself. And Frank Spotnitz has this really, really tongue-in-cheek black humour. But a critic at the time, this episode had really mixed reviews, but one critic pointed out the fact that Rob Bowman was possibly a bad choice of director because he doesn't seem to understand Frank Spotnitz's humour.
Yeah, I think if they'd leaned into the comedy a bit more, given presumably they were still reticent because Humbug was like literal weeks ago, and that was a big contentious point for them anyway, and that might be why this one is a bit erring or too much on the serious side. But breaking down the episode, it's a completely absurd episode. It's great though.
I'm fond of Artown. I've always liked this one. I think it's actually, despite the fact that apparently Spotnitz wrote it because he was trying to write the most disgusting thing he could think of, an entire community engaging in cannibalism in this case. But it's one of those episodes that you have to watch more than once because it's particularly Mr. Charco's dialogue is just full of kind of cannibalism, double entendres and stuff like that. And even the slogan of the refinery is good people, good food.
A little bit on the nose. But I kind of feel like Mr. Chaco should be, the deferment to him should have got more of a laugh, because it's when they say, I can't release the body for autopsy. Well, you're the doctor. Yeah, but Mr. Chaco calls the shots. Is that there should be a reaction
It's
to that.
also even his name, because as Mulder's name dropped the Anasazi, who, again, there's questions with anthropologists about how cannibalistic they were and how much it kind of fed into their culture and why they did it. But it's largely believed that they did engage in it to some degree. And the place where the Anasazi were originally found was called Chaco Canyon. So there we've got Chaco's chicken straight away. It's just such a kind of nice tongue-in-cheek little nod there.
Yes, it's so weird that the next episode is called Anasazi, isn't it?
Anasazi, yeah.
Very odd the next episode is called Anasazi.
Well, apparently that's part of the genesis of this episode, is it's while Spotnitz was researching the Anasazi for that episode, he found out about these kind of reports of cannibalism within the Anasazi tribe, and it helped influence this one.
Yeah, it's just, I have a feeling the next episode is not going to mention this episode at all.
It's also interesting that they call them the Jale tribe in this, but there is actually a tribe in New Guinea who were long suspected of cannibalistic practices called the Fore. I might be pronouncing that wrong. But the Fore, it was always questionable if they were cannibalistic, or at the base degree it might have been some kind of funeral ritual, a mortuary, we eat a bit of Granddad to take on his power sort of cannibalism.
It's always Granddad with you, isn't it?
Sorry, Granddad. But It's they kind of realize the fact that this tribe probably are cannibalistic because there was a large-scale outbreak of kuru, which is another rare prion disease, like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is, which, again, the only way you can explain is so many people in a close community getting a rare prion disease. It's really cannibalism.
It was also very interesting to hear Scully say, oh, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, exceptionally rare, I've only seen it in medical textbooks. When UK residents, I don't think we got familiar with it, but it became a popular subject of discussion around this time period due to mad cow disease and BSE, because there was the risk of transmission.
Because I'm a glutton for punishment, I did read up on CJD and its symptoms and now may never sleep again, in line with this episode. But it's also the fact that apparently in the UK, and we're a lot smaller than you are in America, there are something like 120 cases of this per year. So it's mega rare, but it's not unheard of.
Yeah. And for a while there in the mid-90s, there was an awful lot of debate and controversy and speculation on how safe it was to eat meat, especially cow meat.
They name drop that in the episode about the UK incinerating cattle, which admittedly was more widespread when we had foot and mouth outbreaks and things like that. But that was the British beef scare, it's this fear of the fact that CJD can lie dormant for decades. So you can eat infected disease and be absolutely fine for 10 years, and then contract it, and if you get it, you will die within a year. There's no cure to it.
Absolutely. So Frank Spotness really is onto the sort of did his research on the whole what's the absolute worst thing I could put in an X-Files episode. Yeah, I think you got it here.
Yeah, it's, in a sense, is that the ones who died during the course of this episode are the lucky ones.
Yeah, because they didn't actually have to suffer through the debilitating prolonged exposure to it.
Yeah. It does seem to have sped it up, though, for this episode as well, we'll note, is I think they specifically say that Kearns has vanished 10 weeks ago, and Paula already looks to be in the late stages of CJD.
Yeah, I think the implication has to be that Kearns is actually the source of everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
Given the timeline, he has to have come down with it somehow, and because they've killed him at the start.
According to NHS Direct, where I've done my horrible research, there are different sorts of CJD and it can be entirely spontaneous. You can just get it, which is horrifying.
Yeah.
But you assume this in this case is that Kearns has just got this, but the rest of them have been infected because they've consumed these kind of mutant prions by eating him.
Yeah. And the point about the plastic fork is kind of a nice touch of the random bit of evidence you find early on that actually does have a horrible implication later on. Then you've got the witch's peg, which was a complete red herring.
As was the foxfire.
So I remember saying to you is that this has got to be like the second or third episode where Mulder has got the wrong end of the stick at the start and put them onto this case and found a case that has nothing to do with what he thought it did. Like literally nothing to do with foxfire. And I'm going to say, I suppose this also does tie back into the whole eyewitness reports are kind of useless because whoever reported this reported a bonfire and lanterns.
You've got the guy as well. I didn't mention him in my recap, but one of Mulder's bits of evidence that he shows Scully at the start is a video from the 70s.
Yeah.
With a guy with a missing arm talking about the fire demons trying to catch him.
I mean, we can assume that is Checo's lot, but somehow they just took his arm rather than doing brains like they seem to do for everyone else.
Was it brains, though? Because he had the shrunken heads. He chops the heads off. I don't think they're actually eating the brains, they're eating the bodies.
True, but then you wouldn't actually get the CAD except by eating brains, I thought. It's
a protein, so presumably you get it from any meat.
True, but I think the whole thing about mad cow disease specifically was because they were grinding up the useless parts of the animal, turning into feed for the cows.
You know they're boiling bones, though, so they're eating the entire bodies. I guess you could argue they're eating the brains as part of that, because for Mr. Checo to shrink the heads, he's going to have to remove everything from inside them.
So I took it that basically they were eating the brains. But I'm wondering if that guy from the 70s is either meant to be a red herring or he actually fell foul of them but managed to get away.
I can buy Sheriff Aarons' weird tribal mask. If you've got that and the flaming torches, I could buy Flame Demon. Because that mask is pretty scary with the kind of red feathers and the glowing white paint around the eyes.
Yeah. But the foxfire thing is, I know, did you throw darts at a dartboard to come up with what's the least plausible initial thing we can give that won't have anything to do with the eventual revelation? But also, the audience knows it's not foxfire. Because we've seen people with lanterns and a guy in a tribal mask at the start.
It's obviously a guy in a mask as well. It's not even the ambiguity of, we've seen a shadowy shape, could be a demon.
Yeah. It's an odd structure to this episode because the audience knows Mulder's on the wrong track. He will find something of interest, but he's not on the right track at all.
It's one of those ones like Eve where he starts off kind of investigating a completely different X-file and finds it something even weirder.
True, but Eve, at least, the audience is hoodwinked at the same time, because we didn't know what was going on either.
True.
Whereas this one, we know that's wrong.
Yeah, I guess that is the difference.
But then again, Paula's whole reaction that the plant won't work unless you know she was leading George through the woods.
I was thinking watching it as well as you can infer a lot of the characters have CJD by the end of it, because I think it's both. It's more obvious in the book. Again, there's a book for Our Town. But in the TV show, you see Dr. Randolph looks very sweaty, so does Jess Harold, so does Mr. Charco. So you can read into it is it stress or does he have the disease too? Because literally anyone that's eaten Kearns probably has it.
Yes. And I think there's sort of an implication there, although it might have befallen him eventually, although Mr. Jacob doesn't see it that way. He sees it as when you're turning on your own, that's when troubles began. But it's more a case of you are kind of playing Russian roulette with other people unless you know their complete medical histories, and that they might have this very rare disease. You're going to come a cropper.
It's probably something you never even consider getting
No.
CJD from a human, though. But at the same time, it's the clues in the title is Our Town. It's like my favourite line from League of Gentlemen with the local shop for local people. It's the idea of the insular community who will react violently to outsiders.
That's probably the more entertaining part, is because you know there's a crowd of people at the start when they attack George, but it's not until the end scenes you realise it's the whole town. Basically, everyone's in on this.
I don't think it's the old town. Scully's ending voiceover says 27 people have died so far.
True, but then again, you said about the dormancy of CJD, so it's not
that's
impossible.
true.
It could actually be literally the whole town.
It is for plot convenience. They've all seemed to have contracted it severely to its late stages within a couple of months.
Yeah.
According to the internet, it can lie dormant for up to 10 years, and when it does start showing symptoms, it kills within about a year. So that's way slower than we could manage for this episode.
Yeah. I do like how the baddies, for want of a better word, are put into a weird position in this one. Normally you have Mulder and Scully on the side of truth and justice and wanting to solve the mystery. And normally you have villain of the week, be it Fluke Monster, Tombs, Aliens, Alien Bounty Hunters, whatever, on the other side trying to stop them or do their own thing. Our Town is unique in the whole, you have the two sides, but the baddies don't know what's going on either and want to find out. Because Paula and her stunt at the chicken plant is freaking people out, and the fact that it seems to be spreading and they don't understand why. And it's Mr. Chaco, in normal circumstances, would say, no, you can't autopsy my granddaughter, how dare you? In this one, it's a case of, but I want to find out what's happening, so you can. Or things like, please dredge this river that's really slow and very red. You might be suspicious of it. And they're going, oh, it's a horrible job, I don't want to do that. Oh, we'll call some people in to do it. Oh, no, we'll dredge the river for you. We found all these bones. We're going to just carefully not ever speculate on why all these corpses are in the river we never noticed. Again, feels like a bit of a whole, we've had to gloss over that.
I feel it's the lack of control, though, is Mr. Charco is 90-odd years old. He's working on an old world mentality that's kind of the it takes a village to raise a child sort of feel to it. And he's trying to keep control, because his mantra is just always quite charismatically is, if we all band together, we'll get through this.
No, you won't.
The town wasn't built in a day, it won't be destroyed in a day, and phrases like that, which are very charismatic, very positive phrases. But he just doesn't understand that this is a situation where this won't work. There is no good way for him to get out of this.
No, you've already lost control. The infection's in the population.
Even if you kill the FBI agents, this isn't going to go away.
And that was the other part, is we find eventually like 89 people have gone missing around the area, which accounts for the multitude of corpses.
Within a 200-yard radius. Yeah. It's a huge... 200-mile radius. It is a huge circle around the area.
Yeah, but the implication meant to be that a lot of them have fallen foul of the cult, for want of a better word.
Yeah. We only get the briefest look at Mr. Chaco's cabinet, but there are a good number of heads in it.
Yeah. But you can't help but sort of say, Mr. Chaco, okay, so you're blaming the outsiders. That's what you do. You're going to feed on the outsiders to get unity and strength. You've killed all these other people. The health inspector drew the attention of the FBI. Do you not think killing 2 FBI agents might draw more attention if they've just gone missing in Arkansas? It's not the best
suppose
plan.
you're still going back to he's an old man. He's a far older man than he looks, and he's going back to this sort of wartime mentality.
Also, he doesn't have a choice. Either they figure out what's going on, or he kills them now and hopes no one ever figures out what's going on. So they're too close.
These 2 agents just disappear, and he thinks that'll be it.
Yeah. I mean, there is the hidden narration says there's no trace of CJD found in any of the food products of Chaco Chicken, despite the alarming plausibility that Mr. Chaco had CJD, was fed into the feed grinder and has been fed to the chickens. So there's a possibility there.
You don't know that Mr. Chaco had it, though. He might not have partaken in this for whatever reason. He has the head, which infers he was involved in some way.
Yeah, so, but again, maybe he doesn't contract it because it's not 100% transmission.
Or the plant's been shut down. Maybe those chickens aren't going to be fed to anyone.
It's possible. We still have to have words, though. Scully, what are you doing? You've been to a slaughterhouse, you've been to a chicken processing plant. Both times you said, a steak sounds good, and this bucket of fried chicken sounds really good to me.
She also, at that stage, I don't think we've entirely ruled out the fact that there might be CJD in the food, and we still go for the chickens.
She puts it down, but still, Scully walks in with a giant bucket of chicken, and you're screaming, no, Scully, what are you doing?
It seems that Scully is squeamish when graves are desecrated, but that's the limit of her squeamishness.
There's no way she could have been given that prop and no one said, she wants chicken now? Most people go to a chicken processing plant and say, I'm not eating it for like a month or something.
It's anecdotal, but when I was a young and naive philosophy student, specifically when we were studying ethics, I went to an animal rights rally to give us something to write an essay on. And it was awful.
Yeah.
All the kind of videos they were showing of cruel treatment in slaughterhouses specifically and stuff like that. It was not for the weak-stomached. And as we were leaving, one of my friends just said, you know what, I could murder a burger and I could have decked him.
Say, now? But yeah, Scully seems to have this mindset of she doesn't mind seeing where the sausage comes from. She's still going to eat it.
Yeah.
On some ways, props Scully. On others, I would be thinking twice. I'm sorry. Gonna just leave it alone. Have, just chicken breasts. No processing at all. Just pure meat. Steaks and just chicken breast, that's fine. Any kind of processing, no.
Yep. With you 100%. I think by this point in the X-Files, not only would I be a nervous wreck from the amount of times I've been kidnapped, but I would also be a strict vegetarian.
Yeah. I suppose we should actually get into that as well. Oh my god, Scully, you've been knocked out and kidnapped again.
I'm concerned about the brain damage, to be honest. How many times she's been cracked over the head this season alone?
And abducted, and her whatever happened to her in one breath, which no one really got to the bottom of what that was doing to her other than killing her.
Yeah, not to mention Irresistible and Tombs and every other time that this has happened.
Yep. She's not safe in her own home, she's not safe on assignment. I don't know why she's not retired to teach like she was at the start of the season. She's not safe,
apparently, when Mulder trusts her to go off by herself.
Nope. I mean, it's, again, great that Mulder has no qualms about giving Scully things to do.
Much like in FM Escalata.
Yeah, but at the same time Scully has a tendency to get herself into trouble at this point in the X-Files, which should be a fact as Mulder.
Mulder, when he's alone, like Fearful Symmetry, also sometimes gets into trouble, but it's not...
Not like this.
He's not as easily kidnappable as Scully is, apparently. Mulder is equally good at running off and getting into trouble. It's just kind of... Mulder runs off and gets himself arrested. Scully, when she's out of Mulder's line of sight for 20 seconds, seems to get kidnapped and almost killed every single time.
Yeah, I think the difference is Mulder will... I'm thinking this in terms of the Steven Spielberg War of the Worlds. When Tom Cruise gets separated from his son's saying, I've got to see it, Dad, I've got to see it, and runs over the hill into an explosion, then turns up in Boston at the end, somehow. I feel Mulder's like that. I've got to see it, Scully, runs over the hill into the explosion. And he's off doing something to further his cause. Whereas Scully says, oh, by the way, can you go to the shop for some milk? And, Toombs is there and just knocks her out.
feel it's that I know from what I remember is coming that I'm going to be bringing this a long time. I don't want to keep bringing sexism into it, but it's the vulnerable woman.
Yes.
Scully's quite small. She's a woman. We don't like seeing women in peril, so we'll knock her out and we'll have her on the verge of being murdered, and then the men will come and rescue her.
The verge of being murdered. That guy spends like 2 minutes trying to swing that axe.
To be fair, they frame it better in the book.
I know. In the TV episode, though, George Kearns and Mr. Chaco were sort of thwack, dead.
I do think the book cuts it a bit better. The book doesn't have all the cutaways to Mulder driving up. So literally, Mr. Chaco thwack dead, Scully down, thing raised, and Mulder just appears and shoots him, which doesn't feel as protracted as it is in the actual episode.
No, and it's that establishing shot of Mulder driving up is what does it. Because I think you see him coming along the road, that's fine, and have him shoot the sheriff, that'd be fine. It's that bit where he drives up, stops and gets out. It's like Sleepless, where we had that really long shot of Mulder and Krychek driving through the train yard.
Yes.
And you go, what is this for? I don't need this. Do you really need to pad that 30 seconds of a runtime? Right, just please stop putting her in peril and stop having her nearly killed again.
I think if I was in Scully's position, for realism in the X-Files, is I would be a nervous wreck by now. If I wasn't cripplingly brain damaged for the amount of time I've been cracked over the head and knocked unconscious at that. But we kind of saw it earlier, particularly in Irresistible, as Scully's starting to have issues because of these experiences. And we forgot about Scully's psychological damage for this, yet we're still continuing, it's still happening over and over again.
I do feel as well, and it's probably more of a realism thing, is that the moment in Mulder's office before the case starts is she needs to push back more, given Foxfire. You should be going, what are you talking about, Mulder? Because even the sheriff just says, that's just swamp gas. I mean, it's not... Todd Calm, I think, has been our worst episode setup to date.
We keep mentioning the Foxfire, and I'm not sure, I might be wrong here because I'm not American, and in the UK we tend to call them will-o-wisps and things like that. But Foxfire itself as a term is, I'm pretty sure that in like American medicine and stuff like that, since kind of like Benjamin Franklin times, if my research is correct, you've been pretty aware of what Foxfire actually is. It's like fungi and other things that, like we discovered in Darkness Falls, create luciferin that makes them glow.
Yeah.
But Foxfire as a term is kind of more a sort of thing in Japanese mythology. It's Kitsune. It's the magic used by foxes and hype foxes and things like that creates this kind of glowing green light. Why Foxfire? Why is this term we keep using over and over again?
Very odd for a resident of Arkansas, it feels.
Yeah, it's. I don't know if Americans have an equivalent, as I say, of our will-o-wisps, which is the same idea. It's where swamp gas has got ignited and it forms a kind of blue flare.
I don't understand that either.
Again, correct me if I'm wrong, though. I don't know about Arkansas legends and stuff like that. Maybe Foxfire is prevalent. My research didn't actually turn up anything on that one.
Obviously, we don't see everyone in the X-Files. There must be a load of really dull work days for them where they're just writing reports or they're filing X-Files or they're taking calls or... No idea what day-to-day life in the X-Files office is actually like, do we? We only see the cases where they go into the field.
Or the really boring ones that Skinner made Mulder do to prove a point at the start of the season.
Yeah, well, those weren't X-Files, though. They were...
just general FBI surveillance.
But you kind of feel that at some point Scully... As much as Scully is more open to the supernatural at this point in the series, it's things like Dodd Calm I feel she should have pushed back more on. And like this one with the Foxfire, she'd be going, Mulder, what are you talking about?
I guess it's the Scully is on the X-Files, but Mulder is like X-Files boss and we do what he says.
Yeah, but also, the series has done a good job of giving you the feel of why Scully is hanging around with Mulder or is still doing this apparently dead-end job because there's no career advancement out of the X-Files. You're kind of stuck here.
She kind of believes in Mulder now. She's encouraged by his enthusiasm. She wants to help him.
Yeah.
She wants to help him by putting a more scientific method on his kind of absolute lunacy.
Yes. But you've got to wonder if some mornings he's sort of saying, I could transfer back to Quantico and just go back to teaching again and not be kidnapped or hit over the head or abducted by aliens or black helicopters. or put into an air duct when a rogue AI is trying to kill me.
But how exciting would your life be then?
We need that contrast, though. We need to see
I
the
could
other...
be teaching Quantico, or I could be being kidnapped by death fetishists. Hard choice.
A really hard choice there. I mean, this is sort of breaking out from the rewatch thing, but I don't think we ever get a... Obviously, we don't ever get it, but you never get a sense of what the other days in the X-Files office are like.
The off days.
Yeah, the non-case days. What is that life like for the two of them? Because obviously, we occasionally do see the two of them separated, so we've seen somewhere Mulder's in work and Scully's off, and somewhere Scully's in work and Mulder's off. And we know how they cope with that, but is that really what they do the rest of the time?
I imagine, and I'm pontificating here, but it's the whole... when you go out in the field, you need your partner with you, but you don't need your partner with you all the time if you're not in the field being abducted by death fetishists at the time.
It's very true.
I'd say you're unlikely to be attacked in the X-Files field office, but you've got Cancer Man just down the hall, so it's not beyond the question.
Well, that's why. Is he still in Skinner's office? Can we go check? I mean, surely that would become part of your daily routine in the X-Files. I'm just going to swing by Skinner's office and see if he's in there. Oh, he's there today. Oh, crap.
I'm just going to see if we have any other greenhorns I don't recognise after Kryjik.
But no, it's a case of you drop by Skinner's office. If Cancerman's hanging around, says, "Oh, okay, the government up to something this week." Otherwise, it's just Monster of the Week.
That must be how Mulder knows.
Yeah.
I'm not going to suspect aliens this time because Cancerman is not in the office down the hall.
Except for Eve, though. I suppose he didn't have the rhythm down at that point.
I think you kind of had the inference of aliens in this one as well when he talked about fireballs carrying people away.
Yeah, and I feel that both of them, there's not enough skepticism from either of them at this point in time, because he shows Scully that video of the guy who went mad in the same area. And he just insists it's from this area, this time frame, after he went missing for a week. Was it 3 days or something?
3 days.
3 days. And in some ways, it'd be what was actually going on there, because if it wasn't Mr. Chaco and his crowd, that's an interesting possibility that you've just thrown out as a red herring. On the other hand, I'd like Scully to say, okay, how certain are you, Mulder, that this is the video of that session and that you haven't mixed this up with something else, or this is not a completely unrelated video of a patient in medical care?
I think we have to go by Occam's razor. He was in a lay-by basically in the same place George Kearns disappeared. It was the 70s, and we know that Chaco's been doing this since the late 40s. He's missing an arm. We don't know that Chaco's method was always the same. Perhaps they didn't... Maybe this is why they strap them down now or something like that. Or maybe they slowly dismembered them in the past, and this guy's managed to do an impressive runner with one arm. There are so many variables, but Occam's razor states that if there are similar kind of murders going on in the same area where we know this cult is activated, probably them.
Yeah. It just feels an odd part of the episode, though, doesn't it?
I like it. It's the kind of creepy opening sting. But it's like the sting that you'd have at the start of one of these horror games where this is the clue you give the players to investigate.
And then we ignore it and go somewhere else.
Yeah, that's how you guys normally work, but you're not supposed to ignore it as a thing.
Yeah, I know.
That's supposed to be your hook into the adventure.
Do you have anything else for this episode?
I'd quite like to see the research into cannibalism makes you younger, because apparently cannibalism equals vampirism in Mulder's frame of reference.
Fair point. It's kind of a Countess Bathory feel to it, isn't there?
Yeah, or carrying on from 3, where we had the people who were apparently immortal because they drank human blood.
I think this episode hedges his bets, though, because we've got Mr. Chaco, at least, is way older than he should be.
As is Paula.
Well, they can't confirm Paula because the records are destroyed. They've only got that one instance of her birth date.
True, I suppose. Though that would put her at kind of looking about 30 years younger than she actually is.
It would. So next week we only have one episode. This is Anasazi.
We'll also have our roundup of the season, so if you're following us on either Mastodon or Twitter, do take part in the little polls I've got going at the moment. I want to know what your top 5 favourite episodes of the season are, I want to know what your least favourite episodes of the season are, and I want to know who you think the best villains are.
And why is it Donnie Faster?
So far, nobody said Donnie Faster.
Oh, okay. If you'd like to get hold of us, our email is thingsargettingstrange42@gmail.com.
You can also find us on a bunch of different social medias. On Tumblr and Twitter, we are GetStrange42. On Mastodon, we are at GetStrange42 at universadon.com. And on Facebook, you can find us just by searching for Things Are Getting Strange, an X-Files Rewatch podcast.
If you'd like to help out at all, our Patreon is patreon.com/thingsargettingstrange. And our theme music is Envision by Kevin MacLeod. You can find that on incompetech.com, licensed under the Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. Thank you all for listening, and until next week, remember,
Believe the lie.